From graduating class to indentured class, America eats its own. It's been almost 2 years since I last captured the time and attention of our guest today, Ms. Cryn Johannsen of All Education Matters. Back in March of 2011, and still basking in the chilly spring of the Occupy movement, Cryn was working hard to see that student debt got as much attention as mortgage debt. It's been slow going for her, and I believe, however, that she and other education militants have finally achieved that attention. Just how far they've come and how much farther they have to go in freeing generations of students from a lifetime of debt will be our subject for today. So welcome to the show, Cryn Johannsen.
Thanks. I do not consider myself a militant. I'm truly a pragmatist. And you're right that I suppose the work has been slow going. There's been a lot of behind the scenes that I do on the Hill. But I can tell you one thing, and I can't divulge the particular office that I just went to recently on a congressman's office with a wonderful staffer that I know quite well. I can tell you that maybe it's slow going, but they are listening. They are definitely listening in such a way that I have to say that I'm incredibly hopeful about.
Well, you know, before we dive in then, and by the way, I want you to know that you may not be an activist, but you're hardly a milquetoast either. I'd like to have you give the listener a bit of your background in the world of student debt. How did this come about for you personally, and where do you find yourself today in this world of trying to make a change on student debt?
Sure. Well, like many people my age, I do carry student loan debt, but it's more than manageable. I've never been delinquent on my loans. It's never been a problem. I'm very lucky. I consider myself blessed. I'm a religious person, so I will say that on the radio. But in terms of diving into it, I myself had been working on my PhD actually in intellectual history of Europe, and there was a lot of conversations that we always had of parties and so forth about student loan debt. And this was around the time of the housing crisis in 2008, and I just at that time began to piece together there were parallels, but the big difference was that you can walk away from your home, as we all know, if you're underwater. However, with student loan debt, you can't do that. So there was an intellectual curiosity with how the student loans and the U.S. government and how these institutions were related to financial markets. It's incredibly complex because you're talking about basically the U.S. government, Uncle Sam. They're the biggest lender. Then you're talking about the universities where the money's being funneled to. But then on top of that, you're also talking about a lending industry that was born out of the federal government, all three of which are complex. These are all very complex institutions. All of them are interconnected because of the student loan debt. So
I got the fact that there is a macro level at which this is being approached, but let me get to the thing that seems to be catching attention to people right now. Student debt exceeds $1 trillion. It's considered to be the next bubble to pop. So let me give you a couple of Time magazine article facts. In the last 5 years, the average student loan debt has risen 30%. More than half of student loan accounts add up to more than 40% of the total dollars owed. They're in deferral status, meaning that students are looking for a reprieve for a few years before they have to repay. But these delinquencies are increasing by 22% over the last 5 years. So given how can any of us have any hope of a way out in the face of these statistics?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And one of the things I wanted to say, though, about my interests, and to just return originally to my personal interests, is that I have a deep love for people, and these people, the student loan debtors, have opened up to me in tremendous ways because Americans are very ashamed to talk about debt, and they are hopeless. And as you're probably aware, I wrote an article for the Huffington Post, which I received a scholarship from the Economic Hardship and Reporting Project. Barbara Ehrenreich, the author, and also Gary Rivlin, who's also an author, they were my editors for that piece. And it was about people who are committing suicide, and I continue to get these notes. It's incredibly troubling. But I guess one of the things is that I have a feeling, I know that sounds odd, I just have a feeling that 2013 is going to be the year for us, the indentured educated class. And one of the reasons why is because I've gone through I'm not going to go into the details, but I've gone through a significant loss personally. Very, very intense. But I've prepared myself tremendously, and the reason why I'm saying this is that I am so ready to get this done more than ever before. And I'm not the only one. That's what's great. The more the merrier, in my opinion. There's a lot of us out there, and I think this is going to be the year, despite all these terrible statistics. And they are terrible, right?
Okay, well, first of all, Gary Rivlin, I'm a fan of, when he wrote that book called Broke USA, and he talked about how banks supported and financed loan companies, pawn shops, mortgage people, predators. So anybody who can ally themselves with that guy automatically wins for me. How many people would you consider to fall into your category of being at least militant about changing the world of student debt?
Well, again, I'm hesitant to use that word. I guess I'm more insistent through the power of love, as cheesy as that might sound, and people might say, "Oh, she sounds like she's from the 1960s." Well, so be it. Well, there's plenty of us. I mean, I know Robert Applebaum's still doing quite a bit. I believe Alan Collins is, to the best of my knowledge, but they're not the only ones out there. There's so many groups doing things, and reporters continue to write about this left and right, and I think that's fabulous. The more people talking about it, the better. That's the way it should be. So the more of us out there, the better, and I hope that more and more people join our ranks. We have different approaches, and it's great.
Well, I know that you came up to New York City when Occupy was still blooming at Zuccotti Park. Shortly after, of course, they pulled it out by the roots and thought they'd gotten rid of it, but that didn't happen. What was your impression of Occupy, and do you think that Occupy has been an important force in this?
Oh, it absolutely has. It's a collective voice of people who are deeply in debt. And the thing that I think just shows is these Americans having the courage to go out there with the placards, showing how much debt they owed. I just bless their hearts. I mean, that was the most powerful thing about that, because we hide the debt we have, and we pretend, because of consumer capitalism, that everything's okay and that it doesn't appear that there's any trouble. But we all know that that's not the case, because Americans are just drowning in debt, not just student loan debt. And I was just in awe of the fact that these graduates were walking around with the placards showing how much money they owed and saying, this is really a part of my identity. But I think what we need to work on is moving away from that just being your identity. But it needs to be solved. It just needs to be solved. And that's one of the reasons why I come to D.C., where I'm at right now, because it's time to get this done.
Okay, let's talk about that. Your way of being able to make a difference is by, instead of picketing governmental offices, you're actually walking through the doors and talking to people. So give us some history about that, and how is that making any difference?
Well, I think that, I run All Education Matters on a shoestring budget, as I've said. I've been very lucky to have people who have debt, send me $5 here, $10 there. And that's enabled me to come to Washington, D.C. and walk the halls and knock on the doors and have the conversations, because these offices are, they're lobbied 24/7, including the White House, of course, by the lenders. The Washington Post owns Kaplan, which is a for-profit school. So the senators and the congressmen read those papers and they say, "Oh, what's the problem? There's no problem." Well, but that's changing, and I don't think I'm not the only one. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I have to walk these halls. I have to have face-to-face interactions, which I've been doing for years. And it used to be that when I first started doing this, when I came back from South Korea after teaching there, they would tell me behind closed doors, "Yes, we agree with you. There's a student lending crisis," but they wouldn't say it publicly. And this last summer, I was on a phone call with several senators, including Sherrod Brown, and I'm forgetting the senator's name. I apologize, but this was with hundreds and hundreds of people who represent millennials, the youth generation. And I brought up the problem of suicide, and a senator publicly thanked me for having my ear to the ground and let me know that I remind them, and I'm not the only one, of course, but he told me that I remind them that there are people, the current borrowers, are struggling. And I thought that was a huge moment for the indentured educated class, to be recognized publicly on a phone call in that way, and to be thanked for that. And it's not me. I'm streaming voices of other people. That's That's what I'm doing.
Well, you are, and you are channeling the essence of the spirit. So let's talk about that. Let's say that you have been serving your role and your function to get out this word. And we also talk about the fact that a student is willing to put a placard in front of them saying, I owe $80,000 worth of student debt. I think that their willingness to do that isn't to show themselves as victims as much as to publicly acknowledge that, guess what? I don't know how it happened maybe, but I'm up, it isn't Sugar Creek, and I'm without a paddle. So I think it's important that it has to be, first of all, brought to people's attention, however it's done, and you're doing your job on that. Now, I've heard that there's some governmental agencies investigating the relationship between college administrators and bankers. Do you know anything about this?
If memory serves me, and if I'm following you correctly, the new Consumer Financial Bureau, the new bureau that was the brainchild, was Elizabeth Warren, which I'm so glad that she's a senator now. They have been doing excellent work on investigating the for-profits and putting out superb reports about student loan debts. And this is a very, very good thing. So that's what you're referring to. They're doing some great stuff. And that's our tax dollars at work right there. And I'm delighted. I'm delighted that this new bureau exists. The other thing, too, is that people are not aware of IDR, Income-Based Repayment Program. Now, there is a problem with that, though, which I want to make clear to the listeners, is that this is a loan forgiveness program. If you have federal loans, they're forgiven after 20 years, which is good. However, and hopefully this will change, and Stafford told me that it probably will or it should, you will be taxed on the remaining amount that has been forgiven. So the year that your loans are forgiven, guess who's going to come knocking at your door? The IRS, which is not good. I don't understand why they put this in, why they had that, but this is something that absolutely has to change, because then what's the benefit of the loans being forgiven?
Well, let me
you owe $10,000 or more in that year for taxes.
Well, let me address that. There's no such thing as loan forgiveness. As far as I'm concerned, it's just loan trickery. It's a form of it's a shell game.
It's problematic, yes.
Well, when you think of it, the American student is the only class of citizen other than a convicted felon who cannot declare bankruptcy on their debt.
Right.
Now,
it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
So
punish people for getting an education. Why? Why are we like that? Very odd. Look at it.
It isn't odd if you happen to be on one side of the political spectrum in which you hold the fact that, number one, everybody has to be accountable and responsible, and number two, you also fill up your wallet at the local university or college so that you can continue your campaign about good citizenship. So that's a personal gripe of mine, and I think that the relationship between college administrators and bankers has got to be put out into the spotlight.
Right. But I think more than anything, though, Jerry, is that for me, I guess I'm at the point where it's no longer about pointing fingers and blaming. It's more of, this is a systemic problem. I've said this many times, but this is a terrible systemic problem, and it can be sorted out. Lightning can strike like that in D.C., as a matter of fact, and things can be changed. And I know that people might think, oh, she has, rose-tinted glasses on, but that does happen, especially if there's the power of this type of movement like what you see with Occupy, and you have lots of busy beavers, if you will, people like me, who continually bring it up and bring it up and bring it up. And there can be push and there can be movement. I mean, you can look at the civil rights movement to see that sort of thing. I mean, that started, and probably, many people argue, historians, the civil rights movement began in the early 1900s. And then we moved forward with Martin Luther King in the 60s. This stuff takes time. And that's all right. Now, I wish that it could be solved immediately because of the people who want to kill themselves. Yeah. It's terrible. It hurts in my heart deeply.
Well,
but it takes time.
Well, Cryn, speaking of time, we could do 15 hours and not 15 minutes, in fact, on your work.
Right.
So what I must do is end the section now, but please let the listener know how they can reach you. For example, do you have an email address, a website, a Twitter account? How can they reach you?
I want them to follow me on Twitter. I'm very responsive on that. My name is Cryn, CRYN _ JOHANNSEN. That's my handle, at CRYN _ JOHANNSEN. They can also subscribe to me on Facebook. Just look up my name. They can also email me. It's CCRYNJOHANNSEN @gmail.com. Again, CCRYNJOHANNSEN @gmail.com. I promise to try to get in touch with them as soon as possible. I'm also a teacher, and I'm writing a book about the student lending crisis. So I'll keep you posted on announcements with that. There's a big thing coming out about that. So I'm very, very busy at work, and I'm also teaching English as a second language, which is a big honor. Well, so I'm embedded in education, as you can tell.
And what do you do in your spare time, Cryn?
I don't know. Spare time, what is that again? I'm just very busy. Well, busy, solving problems.
Okay, well, one thing I will do is ask you to give us a final word before we sign off.
A what?
A final thought.
Final word? Well, I guess it's all those people out there who are suffering. I want them to know that they're not alone, and that especially those who are suicidal, please don't be that way. I want them to turn to people they trust, family and friends, people that they can speak to about this. This is not something that you should end your life over. I cannot say that enough times. And I'm also speaking from a personal perspective, not about debt, but through a great deal of suffering. Through suffering, you can see solutions and things can get better. That's my final thoughts on this.
That's a wonderful thought, Cryn. I want to thank you. And this is Jerry Ashton here at WGRNradio.com, bringing you 15 minutes of fact as an inoculation against the many hours of faux that's usually generated by mainstream media. So I want to thank my listeners for attending to this show. Be reminded that you're searching out my blog at the Huffington Post, and friending me there would be appreciated as well. Signing off, Jerry Ashton.